When you flee a country, sometimes you don't have time to collect other members of your own family, let alone collect your belongings. Vietnam went through a very turbulent period, which ended in the fall of Saigon in 1975 and the mass exodus of refugees from the country. It's unprecedented. The reason behind that mass exodus was the sense of desperation. You're forced into a radical decision, to flee. So I left on a boat with over 100 other fellow boat people, and it took us 7 days and end up in a refugee camp. The United Nations Commission for Refugees could not foresee the scale of the exodus from Vietnam. They could not provide enough housing for refugees, so many ended up living in tents on an island that had not been inhabited by humans. So it was a pretty rough kind of place. That's where I stayed for another year and a half before I was accepted by the Australian government.
An asylum seeker would be someone who would be driven out of the country. They don't have any choice but really to look for another place and another community, perhaps another country. And I know I even hear at the time about the boat people or people who have to walk and walk and walk for hundreds of kilometers just to escape all the persecutions. Because some of the stories as well were related to me by some friends that I made when I was in Africa.
I came to Australia to cover the Commonwealth Games for one of our favorite female athletes. There are work that I've been doing back home before I came, wherein I've been doing advocacy against female genital mutilations, which was widely practiced in Africa as a whole and 99% in my country where I came from. Looking at the fact that women and children, they die out of female genital mutilations, and at the end of the day, even some of the instruments that have been used, they are not sterilized. There was a whole article and the publications that I wrote. The journalist who did all the editing, he published it whilst I was in Australia. So within that period, it caused a massive impact, and we are closer to the election. Governments, we are looking for the perpetrator. They seem like a perpetrator. They will kill you and it will not be recognized in any media. You need to ask for protection. And that forced me, when I check on my Google, the first thing that came up was Jesuit Refugee Services. And because it have that relationship with Catholic, I just found myself I am part of this family because I grew up in a Catholic home. So by then that moved me from Gold Coast and moved to Sydney because that was the only place I could able to found GRS. So that was the reason and how I stay in Australia.
I come from the Middle East, where communities are split among, sectarian lines and ethnic lines and all sorts of lines, and most of them are made up lines. So it was quite hard to stay in Iraq after the war because of the sectarian conflict that was going on there. And when war broke out in Syria, we had to travel in different countries. because of the situation in Iraq and our family history, and then the situation in Syria and the Middle East generally. And as I said, we moved between several countries before we got our visas approved to come to Australia. So when I see this community is thriving because it's working together instead of having conflict, it's important to understand this privilege that we have here and not let it go away.